They said the battle was over by dusk. The horns had long gone quiet, absorbed by the flattening mist that crept over the reeds. Iron clashed no more, and the shrill cries of dying men had been muffled by the soaked earth, as if the land itself had grown weary of human agony. The birds did not return that evening. The frogs had gone still. Only the wind, threading its fingers through the sedge, bore witness to what remained. No one remembered the name of the battle, only that it was the last. He had no title, only a first name lost in parish records now eaten by mice. But in the village nearest the Faun, the elders still murmured of the one who walked into the mire and did not return. Some called him a deserter, others, a chosen soul. A few, and these were always the old women with the clouded eyes, whispered that he had not walked into the bog at all, but had been taken, consumed, made part of the old mud, where time holds its breath. But once he was flesh and bone, a man, a soldier like any other, calloused, quiet, and 24 winters old. His final morning had smelled of iron, sweat, and cold oats. The sun had not yet risen, but the sky was pale with the threat of it. Around him, in the half-light, men fastened leather to linen and spoke in the blunt rhythm of fatalists. No one made promises. They barely looked at one another. War had shaved away affection, leaving only the machinery of survival. He was not brave, not more than the others, not cruel either, just tired. There was a silence in him that had no edge, not the silence of fear, but of someone who had simply stopped waiting for anything. When the horn called them to formation, he tied the cord around his wrist twice, so it would not slip, and walked. The enemy had no face. None of them did. In the records, it was unclear who attacked first. No names, no banners, only colors, gray against brown. The historians would argue later that it had been a mistake, a misread signal in the fog. But that morning, no one thought of reasons, only of mud beneath their boots and the closeness of death. By midday, they were knee-deep in water. The ground had turned against them. Arrows fell blindly from the mist, and men bled where they stood. One horse screamed so loud it broke something in the air. Then silence again. Cold, wet silence. He had lost his sword by then. Lost a friend too. A boy with a hare-lip who had told stories about his sister's bread. He didn't cry when the boy stopped moving, just closed his eyes for a moment, then moved on. It was later, near dusk, that the land opened its mouth. He had wandered, separated from his unit, if there was any unit left at all. Around him, the Faun stretched wide and indifferent, reeds tall as men, water black with the memory of centuries. He stepped where the moss gave way and sank. Panic came late. At first, he struggled, tried to pull free, but the bog had no sympathy. The more he thrashed, the deeper it swallowed. It was not fast. The mire was patient. It took him slowly up to the knee, then the hip, then the chest. He shouted once. No one answered. Even the sky turned its face. Some say he sang a hymn, maybe, though none recall the words. Some say he prayed. Others say he just breathed deeply and went still. That was when the silence changed. It wasn't the silence of fear or death. It was the silence of something ancient being remembered, as if the land itself had paused. Then he was gone. He left no grave, no sword in stone, no cairn of honor. Only the reeds marked the place, standing upright long after men had fallen. But sometimes, on quiet nights in the village, a shepherd might see a flicker of movement at the edge of the marsh. A figure not quite man, not quite shadow. Tall, watchful, not threatening, just waiting. And the old women will nod and say softly to no one in particular. He never left. He just changed. Years passed, and with them names faded. The soldiers who had marched into the Faun that year were mostly lost to time. Those who returned did not speak of it. Not because of horror, but because the memory was too soft, too shapeless. Like trying to recall a dream after waking. Faces blurred. Orders forgotten. The reason for the war itself grew dim. The parchment records turned to dust, and the silence of the swamp began to thicken around the truth. But the bog remembered. It remembered everything. the curl of a man's finger as he reached upward, the impression of his knee as it folded beneath him, the faint pressure of his heartbeat as it slowed in the cold. The water held him like a secret. No rot, no decay, only stillness, and the centuries moved around him like fog. In the village it became a story, the nameless soldier who walked into the bog and never returned. Children were told to stay away from the reeds, not because of wolves or drownings, but because the man in the water might see them, might think they too were meant to vanish. Some said he called out at night. Others claimed he pulled lost animals toward him, gently, like a shepherd beneath the surface. The truth, of course, was quieter. The swamp, when left untouched, is not cruel. It is contemplative. The reeds do not rush. The water moves only when it must. There is a kind of honesty in it, a refusal to mimic the world of men, with its thirst for noise and speed. In the Fon, time folds inward. There are no clocks, no bells. Only the rising and falling of mist, the breath of frogs, the soft wing beats of things unseen. Had he been aware in those first hours beneath the mire, and who can say? He might have felt the slow cooling of the world around him, the release of burden, no sword to carry, no oath to uphold, no name to defend. And yet, freedom is not always a mercy. What makes a man more than a shadow is not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning. And meaning, in the end, is a fragile thing. It slips easily into silence. In the nearby chapel, an old monk once wrote in a margin, "The body is a candle and the world the wind, but the soul, perhaps the soul is a root that grows downward, into the dark, into truth." He never explained what he meant. Perhaps he had walked near the Fon one too many times and felt its hush settle into his bones. Perhaps he dreamed of the man the villagers would not name. But the idea lingers, that some spirits are not meant to rise, but to sink, not in despair, but in depth. By the third decade after the war, only the oldest widow in the village remembered the soldier's face. "He had quiet eyes," she said once, blind by then but certain. Not kind, not cruel, just quiet, as if he had already seen too much. She lit a candle for him every year on the day the battle might have been. No one else did. No songs were sung. No saint adopted him. He was not martyred, nor cursed. He simply disappeared. But even silence has a weight. And in time that weight became legend. They began to call him the Watcher Beneath, though no one knew who said it first. A boy lost in the fog was found unharmed near the marsh's edge, shivering but untouched. He claimed a man had spoken to him, not with words, but with presence. "He didn't want me to be afraid," the child whispered, eyes wide. He was alone. A lie? A dream? A child's fantasy? Most believed so. But the old widow, before she passed, just nodded slowly and said, "Even the forgotten remember." The year was one no one remembered. There had been another winter, long and gray, and another king had died, though fewer now seemed to care when crowns changed hands. The village by the Fon remained, untouched by war, untouched by time. The path to it had narrowed, hedges growing wild and roads sinking into moss. But the chapel still stood, and the reeds still whispered when no one watched. It was then, on a dusk that had no color, that a stranger arrived. He wore the threadbare robe of a pilgrim, though no emblem marked his chest. His hands were ink-stained, his boots crusted with long travel. He asked little, slept in the hay loft of a barn, ate whatever crusts the sisters of the chapel offered, and each morning, he went to the edge of the marsh and simply stood, unmoving, unblinking, as if listening for something beneath the water. The villagers watched, whispered, wondered if madness had touched him. When the baker's boy, full of foolish curiosity, finally asked what he sought, the man answered only, "I'm here to remember what others have chosen to forget." By then, the tale had thinned into a superstition. Caution. A children's rhyme sung half in jest. Don't stray near the water's edge. The stillest pool has eyes. The man beneath remembers all, and waits for what time denies. But the pilgrim was not a child. He did not laugh at rhymes. He kept a small book, leather-bound, worn smooth with use. At night, in candlelight, he would write. No one saw the pages. But now and then, as the wind curled through the chapel stones, a phrase might be heard, spoken aloud like prayer. To vanish is not to die. To vanish is to linger without name. He had come from the coast, some said. Others thought him a scholar cast out by the abbey for heresy. But when asked directly, he offered no story. Only a glance. His eyes were pale, as if washed out by years of staring into too much sky. On the fifth night, the widow's granddaughter, bold and unafraid, brought him broth and sat beside him. "You look for the one who sank," she said plainly. He nodded once. "Why?" The pilgrim stirred the broth but did not drink. Then softly, "Because sometimes a man disappears, and the world becomes a little quieter. But if you listen closely, his silence still speaks." She did not fully understand. But she remembered the way he spoke. Not like someone trying to explain something, but like someone gently breaking a spell. That same night, he left the village and walked into the mist. He took no lantern, no staff, only the book pressed to his chest. And the villagers, hardened as they were, did not sleep. They waited, not out of worry, but because something ancient stirred in the hush, a memory not fully their own, as if the ground beneath them remembered the weight of a man who once marched into death and did not resist it. At dawn, the pilgrim had not returned, but neither had the fog lifted. It was the child, again, who saw it first, standing on the chapel roof, chasing imaginary crows. "There's someone in the water," he called. But when the others ran to look, there was nothing. Only the reeds swaying, only the hush, only the sound, perhaps imagined, of pages turning just beneath the surface. The pilgrim was never seen again. His book was found days later, floating near the edge. The ink had bled. Most words were lost. But on the last page, scratched in with something sharper than quill, remained a single line. He did not drown. He was kept. In time, the chapel fell into ruin. Not all at once. Not with fire or flood. But the slow kind, the kind that happens when no one argues against the moss. When the roof lets in rain a drop at a time. When the stones shift beneath their own weight and forget how to hold each other up. The last monk who lived there died in his sleep with an open psalter and a feather clutched in his hand. No one buried him. The village had long since stopped sending sons to serve God, and God, it seemed, had turned his face elsewhere. But even as the church crumbled, something remained. Not the bell that had cracked and been sold. Not the books they had moldered into pulp. What remained was a presence. People began to avoid the path that led between the chapel and the marsh. Not out of fear, not exactly. It was something quieter. A weight behind the ribs. A sense that if they looked too long at the water, they might see something looking back. One autumn, when the wind came early and the trees shed their leaves without color, a priest arrived from the west. He was not old, but already weary. His hands trembled when he held the wafer. His sermons were short, and his eyes never met the eyes of his flock. He had heard the story, of course, but priests hear many stories. And what are legends to a man trained in theology? Yet even he began to change. He started walking at night, always toward the bog, always alone. He said it helped him think. But thinking, they noticed, made him paler. The congregation, what little remained, began to worry. They said he mumbled in his sleep, that he left candles lit until they drowned in wax, that he placed one bowl of water at the altar and stared into it for hours, waiting. What did he wait for? He never told them. But in the margins of one of the surviving hymnals, beneath the Magnificat, he had written, "It is not death we fear, it is being lost. But the marsh does not lose what it takes, keeps." And in the second winter of his service, when the Faun froze for the first time in 30 years, he walked barefoot across the ice. He was never found. Not his body, not even his cassock, only his rosary, left on the chapel step, tangled with reeds. There were arguments then, bitter, exhausted ones. The bishop's men said the place should be burned. that the ground had turned, that demons had crept in through the soft places of belief. But the village refused. You see, by then they had grown used to the story. It had settled into them, not as threat but as presence. Familiar, like old sorrow, like a house creaking at night, not from ghosts, but from remembering how many lives had passed through it. And so the chapel remained, roofless, cracked, silent. But on certain evenings, when the mist rises early, villagers swear the stones hum. A low sound, not music, not quite, but not madness either. Some say it's the voice of the priest. Others say it is older than that. There is a kind of holiness, perhaps, that does not belong to saints or books. A holiness born of endurance, of being remembered long after all else is lost. And in the land where the soldier sank, and the pilgrim vanished, and the priest walked barefoot into the ice, that holiness still breathes, slowly, deeply, without name. The boy was born during a storm, not the kind that tears roofs or swells rivers, but one of wind and murk. A sky without shape, clouds hanging low like thoughts unsaid. The midwife claimed the candles would not stay lit, that the dog outside howled once and then would not howl again. The mother bled too long. The child did not cry. They named him after no one. The father, a carpenter, hammered with quiet violence in the weeks that followed. The mother stopped singing. And the boy, though healthy, though strong, always looked as though he were listening to something no one else could hear. By the time he was 5, he knew the path to the fun. Not because he had been taken there, but because he dreamed it. In sleep, he saw reeds as tall as steeples, and water that mirrored not the sky but a face. A pale face watching from beneath. Not cruel, not kind, just watching. He did not speak of it, not at first. But once, during the harvest feast, when the old widow, the last to remember the soldier's eyes, dropped her cup, the boy knelt and whispered, "He waits still, but not for us." After that, they watched him differently, some with fear, others with pity. One woman crossed herself when he passed, though he only smiled, as if the gesture meant less than she thought. By 8, he had taken to walking at dawn, alone, without shoes. Once, a shepherd found him kneeling in the cold marsh grass, hands open, not in prayer but in listening. "What do you hear?" the man asked. The boy did not look away, only answered, "Everything that doesn't want to be heard." At night, he drew in charcoal, circles, layers, shapes that bled into each other like water through cloth. The drawings frightened his mother. She burned them, but they returned. More than one showed the chapel, broken, roofless, with a figure standing inside, arms outstretched, as though trying to remember what it meant to be whole. And always, in the corner of the page, a pool of black. A shape that was not a man, not anymore, but not a ghost either. When he turned 12, he stopped speaking. Not in defiance, not in sorrow, but in choice, as if words had become too small. He would sit for hours beneath the old ash tree, eyes half closed, hands tracing the grooves in the bark. And if asked anything, he would simply look, not at the questioner but beyond them, as though listening still. One evening, his mother, desperate and afraid, knelt beside him and begged, "Are you cursed?" The boy touched her hand. His was cold, and in a voice that had not spoken in months, he whispered, "No, I'm remembering for him, because no one else will." The next morning he was gone. No footprints, no broken grass, only a ring of stones left on his bed, wet with dew, and a drawing pinned to the shutter, marked with a single word, "Kept." The villagers, older now, did not search, not because they didn't care, but because they understood. There are places that do not take with violence. They take with purpose, with waiting, with patience, with invitation. And sometimes, when silence lives too long in one child, the marsh will open once more. And so the boy joined the others, the soldier who vanished in dusk, the pilgrim with the ink-stained hands, the priest who crossed the ice barefoot. All of them kept, all of them changed, all of them remembered. The reeds are taller now. The path to the Foan is nearly gone. swallowed by briars and seasons and the patient hands of time. The village, too, has thinned. Roofs sag inward. Fences rot. The schoolhouse holds no children. But the wind still knows the way. And sometimes it carries with it a sound. Not a voice, not quite. Like breath moving through hollow places. The land, it seems, remembers. No one speaks of the soldier now. His name, never recorded, has vanished like ink in floodwater. The war is not taught in schools. The field where men once fell is now just bog, soft and impassable. The chapel has collapsed entirely. Only 3 stones stand upright, mossed over, nameless. But the story lives. Not in books, not even in words. It lives in the feeling one gets walking near the edge of the marsh. That hush, that slow, deep quiet, as if the earth itself is listening. Some say the soldier was the first, but not the last. Some say the marsh takes those who carry too much silence. Others believe it takes those the world has forgotten, and gives them back to something older than death. But there are no answers here. Only questions spoken softly, so as not to wake the stillness. A scholar came once with instruments and maps. He took samples of peat, measured carbon, spoke of preservation and bog bodies. He said it was remarkable how well the faun kept things, perfectly preserved, untouched by decay. A miracle of nature, he called it. He did not stay the night. In time, even the name of the village fell off the maps. The roads were not repaired. The signs were not replaced. But every now and then, a traveler, lost or guided by something they cannot name, arrives. They do not knock. They do not ask questions. They simply walk down the old root-choked trail and sit at the edge of the water, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. And when they rise again, their eyes are different. Not brighter, not darker, just quieter. There is a kind of peace in the forgetting. But there is a deeper peace in being remembered by something. That does not need your name to hold you. We think of legends as loud things. Trumpets, banners, statues. But some legends are soft. So soft they slip beneath the skin and become part of how the land breathes. The man who vanished in the swamp did not leave behind a monument. Only stillness, only water, only a sense. Passed from mouth to mouth, from silence to silence. That he is still there, waiting, watching, not for rescue, not for justice, just for someone to understand. That to be kept is not always to be trapped. Sometimes it is to be held. And if you walk there one day, not with purpose, but with ache, you may feel it too. A hush that presses gently against your ribs. A weight that is not heavy, but whole. A presence beneath your feet, deeper than death. Older than the church, wiser than the wind, and you may realize he was never lost, only waiting to be remembered. The mire never forgets, but it only speaks to those who listen.